The first person to laugh was not a stranger. It was Eleanor Ashcombe's own cousin. The sound carried across the ballroom like the crack of thin ice beneath a winter boot. "Oh, do not be cruel," another young gentleman said with a grin that suggested precisely the opposite. "Lady Eleanor cannot dance. She spends all her evenings hiding behind books." A few nearby guests chuckled. Then more joined them. Within moments, an entire circle of aristocrats was smiling at a joke Eleanor had heard in one form or another her entire life. She lowered her gaze and pretended not to notice. Pretending had become one of her greatest skills. The grand ballroom of Ashcombe Manor blazed with candlelight. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead like captured constellations. Silk gowns drifted across polished marble floors. Music swelled from a string quartet hidden among white roses and ivy. Yet Eleanor felt invisible inside all that beauty. At 23, she possessed neither the dazzling confidence nor the effortless charm society demanded of women. Her chestnut hair rarely obeyed fashion. Her spectacles invited ridicule. Her quiet nature was mistaken for weakness. Most painfully of all, she had spent years standing beside her younger sister. Vivian Ashcombe was everything London adored. Golden-haired, radiant, witty. The sort of young woman who could command attention merely by entering a room. Gentlemen competed for her smiles. Mothers dreamed of claiming her as a daughter-in-law. Every gathering became a celebration of Vivian's beauty. And every celebration reminded Eleanor what she was not. "Lord Whitmore has asked for my third dance," Vivian whispered excitedly earlier that evening. Their mother had beamed with pride. "Excellent. Perhaps he shall ask for your hand before the season ends." Neither woman had looked toward Eleanor. Neither had noticed her standing beside them. It was not deliberate cruelty. That somehow made it worse. By now, neglect had become a habit within the Ashcombe household. Even her father, a kind man burdened by debts and worries, often forgot that Eleanor preferred libraries to parties, gardens to gossip, and conversations of substance over flirtation. Nobody asked what she wanted. Nobody imagined she might want anything at all. As the evening continued, she watched another suitor approach Vivian. Then another. Then another. The pattern never changed. Eleanor stood near a marble column while guests flowed around her like water around a stone. Eventually a young lord she barely knew approached. Hope flickered before she could stop it. Perhaps he intended to ask for a dance. Perhaps this evening might be different. Instead he offered a mocking bow. "Lady Eleanor," he announced loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "if no gentleman claims you before midnight, perhaps we should award a prize for remarkable persistence." Laughter erupted. Someone added, "or extraordinary patience." The circle laughed harder. Heat flooded Eleanor's face. For one terrible moment she remained frozen beneath dozens of watching eyes. Then she noticed something worse. Vivian was laughing too. Only briefly. Only because everyone else was. But Eleanor saw it. The laughter stopped almost immediately when Vivian realized what she had done. Yet the damage lingered. 1,000 tiny humiliations had led to this moment. This one simply hurt more because it came from someone she loved. Without a word, Eleanor turned and walked away. No one followed. No one stopped her. The music continued behind her as though she had never existed. She crossed quiet corridors illuminated by golden lamps and descended a staircase leading toward the oldest wing of the estate. The sounds of the ballroom gradually faded. At last she reached the conservatory. Glass walls surrounded a hidden garden where moonlight spilled across stone pathways and sleeping flowers. The room smelled faintly of earth, rain, and roses. It had always been her sanctuary. When she was a child, she came there to escape tutors. When she became older, she came there to escape people. Tonight she sank onto a wooden bench beside a cluster of white roses and finally allowed herself to breathe. Tears threatened. She refused them. Crying would change nothing. The world had already chosen its favorite sister. The world had already decided which Ashcombe daughter deserved attention. A soft rustle interrupted her thoughts. Eleanor stiffened. She had believed herself alone. A man stepped from the shadows near the far end of the conservatory. Tall, dark-haired, impeccably dressed in black evening attire. Recognition arrived instantly. Sebastian Hawthorne, Duke of Blackthorn, the wealthiest duke in England. The man whose estate stretched across counties. The man mothers practically worshipped. The man every ambitious family hoped to claim. For a heartbeat neither spoke. "I beg your pardon," Eleanor said quietly. "I did not realize anyone else was here." "Nor did I." His voice was calm and unexpectedly warm. He glanced toward the ballroom. "You seem determined to avoid the festivities." A faint smile touched Eleanor's lips. "I might say the same of your grace. Then perhaps we are both guilty." The answer surprised her. Most powerful men enjoyed hearing themselves speak. This one appeared content to listen. An unusual silence settled between them. Not awkward, not forced, simply peaceful. For the first time all evening, Eleanor felt no pressure to become someone else. The Duke eventually noticed the closed notebook resting beside her. A journal? Merely observations. Observations of what? People, flowers, places, whatever seems worth remembering. His expression sharpened with interest. That sounds considerably more useful than most conversations occurring inside that ballroom. A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. The sound startled both of them. Moments later, distant voices echoed from the corridor. Guests were searching for the Duke. Duty reclaimed him. He offered a courteous bow. "Lady Eleanor, Your Grace." Then he departed. Only after reaching her bedroom later that night did Eleanor realize something dreadful. Her notebook was gone. Back in the conservatory, resting unnoticed beside the bench, the forgotten journal remained where she had left it. And hours later, while London's most ambitious mothers competed for the Duke's attention beneath glittering chandeliers, Sebastian Hawthorne sat alone in a private study turning its pages, discovering a woman no one else had ever bothered to see. Morning sunlight spilled across the breakfast room of Ashcombe Manor, turning silver cutlery into ribbons of gold and illuminating the fresh flowers arranged along the long oak table. Yet despite the beauty surrounding her, Eleanor Ashcombe struggled to focus on anything beyond the memory of the previous evening. The Duke's unexpected kindness lingered in her thoughts like a melody she could not forget. She had spent half the night wondering whether she had imagined their conversation in the conservatory. Men like Sebastian Hawthorne belonged to a world far above hers. Dukes did not seek out overlooked women. They certainly did not spend their evenings discussing journals and flowers. Perhaps he had simply been polite. The theory comforted her. It also disappointed her. "Eleanor, are you listening?" Her mother's voice pulled her back to the present. She glanced up. Vivian sat across the table surrounded by admiration as usual. Their mother was discussing invitations, eligible gentlemen, and the growing excitement surrounding the remainder of the London season. "No, Mama," Eleanor admitted softly. "I apologize." Her mother sighed. "One day, dear, you must learn to pay attention to matters that concern your future." Eleanor nearly smiled. The irony was almost amusing. Nobody ever included her future in these discussions. A servant entered carrying a polished wooden box. "Delivery for Lady Eleanor." Silence immediately settled across the room. The servant placed the box before her. Eleanor blinked. "For me?" "So it appears, my lady." Her mother frowned. Vivian looked equally confused. With careful fingers, Eleanor opened the lid. Inside rested a rare botanical volume bound in deep green leather. Her breath caught. She recognized the title instantly. The book had been printed decades earlier and was nearly impossible to find. Tucked beneath it lay a small card. No signature. Only 3 words. "For your collection." The mystery consumed the household for the remainder of the day. Their mother assumed an admirer had finally appeared. Vivian insisted it must be a mistake. Eleanor herself remained uncertain. She could not imagine who would spend such a fortune on a woman most gentlemen ignored. Yet 3 days later another package arrived. This time it contained pressed alpine flowers gathered from Switzerland. The following week brought a volume of poetry she had once mentioned wanting to read. Then came a collection of hand-colored illustrations depicting rare English roses. Each gift reflected a private interest she had never shared publicly. Someone knew her. Someone was listening. For the first time in years, anticipation entered her mornings. Not because she expected gifts, because the unknown sender understood things about her that nobody else seemed to notice. The changes were subtle. She smiled more often. She spent longer in the gardens. Hope, once abandoned, slowly returned. Unfortunately, hope attracted attention. And attention attracted gossip. By the end of the month, whispers followed Eleanor through every drawing room in London. Some claimed she was secretly engaged. Others suggested a wealthy foreign nobleman was pursuing her. Several women insisted the gifts were part of an elaborate prank. The rumors grew stranger with every telling. Vivian suffered the situation particularly badly. For the first time in her life, she was not the center of every conversation. One afternoon she confronted Eleanor inside the library. "Who is sending them?" "I honestly do not know." "You must know." "I do not." Vivian studied her face. For a moment resentment flashed behind her beautiful eyes. Then guilt followed. Neither emotion disappeared quickly enough. You realize people are laughing. They laughed before. This is different. Eleanor quietly closed her book. Yes, it is. The answer ended the discussion. Weeks later, London gathered for Lady Windermere's celebrated spring reception. Crystal chandeliers hung above hundreds of guests. Musicians performed beneath garlands of white blossoms. Noble families filled the magnificent ballroom with silk, diamonds, and ambition. Eleanor attended only because refusing would disappoint her father. She expected another evening spent observing from the edges of society. Instead, she became the evening spectacle. The moment she entered, conversations shifted. People stared. Whispers followed. Several women glanced deliberately toward her before exchanging knowing smiles. She tried to ignore them. Unfortunately, the evening had other plans. Near the refreshment tables, a fashionable young countess blocked her path. The woman smiled sweetly enough to deceive anyone unfamiliar with aristocratic warfare. "My dear Lady Eleanor," she said loudly, "I hear your mysterious benefactor remains devoted." Several nearby guests turned to listen. Eleanor forced a polite expression. "I know nothing about such matters." How refreshing. A romance conducted entirely in ignorance. Laughter rippled through the group. The Countess's gaze dropped toward Eleanor's spectacles. What a fortunate admirer. He clearly values intelligence over appearances. The insult was expertly delivered. Refined. Cruel. Designed to wound while preserving deniability. Eleanor felt old embarrassment rising inside her. Then another voice entered the conversation. "An admirable quality, would you not agree?" The room fell silent. Sebastian Hawthorne stood behind them. The Duke's black evening coat contrasted sharply against the brilliant ballroom. Authority surrounded him as naturally as breathing. The Countess immediately paled. "Your Grace." His attention remained fixed on Eleanor. "I find it remarkable," he said calmly, "that a lady's vision is criticized most often by those who possess so little insight." Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. The Countess flushed crimson. For one glorious moment, Eleanor witnessed what true power looked like. Not arrogance. Not intimidation. Protection. The Duke offered his arm. "Lady Eleanor, would you accompany me?" Shock echoed across the ballroom. Every ambitious mother watched. Every unmarried daughter stared. Every rumor suddenly felt alive. Eleanor hesitated. Then she accepted. Together they crossed the room while silence followed behind them. For the next hour Sebastian spoke with her as though she were the most fascinating person present. He asked about books, gardens, travel, art. He remembered details from conversations she barely recalled mentioning. More astonishing still, he listened carefully to every answer. When she laughed, genuine warmth entered his eyes. When she spoke, he never interrupted. The experience felt so unfamiliar that it frightened her. Because kindness from strangers could be dismissed. This felt different. Dangerously different. As the evening drew toward its conclusion, Eleanor stood beside a balcony overlooking moonlit gardens. The Duke joined her. Neither spoke immediately. Below them, fountains shimmered beneath silver light. Above them, stars glowed beyond drifting clouds. Finally Sebastian broke the silence. "Tell me, Lady Eleanor." His voice carried a quiet seriousness she had never heard before. "If one wished to scandalize all of London at once." She turned toward him. A faint smile touched his lips. "Would asking you for the first dance at the royal garden party accomplish the task?" And for the first time since the gifts began arriving, Eleanor wondered whether she had finally discovered the identity of the man who had been quietly changing her life. The royal garden party became the talk of London before the sun had even set. By midnight, every drawing room, carriage, and private supper table echoed with the same astonishing story. Duke Sebastian Hawthorne had ignored the daughters of earls, marquises, and dukes. Instead, he had chosen Eleanor Ashcombe for the first dance. Not once. Not by accident. Publicly. Deliberately. Repeatedly. The scandal spread faster than wildfire through dry grass. For the first time in her life, Eleanor found herself at the center of society's attention. Unfortunately, attention carried its own burdens. Wherever she appeared, whispers followed. Women lowered their voices when she entered rooms. Gentlemen studied her with curiosity rather than indifference. Many seemed unable to decide whether she was fortunate or foolish. Some openly predicted the Duke would soon lose interest. Others insisted he was pursuing a wager. Nobody appeared willing to believe a man like Sebastian Hawthorne might genuinely admire a woman like Eleanor. The assumptions wounded her more than she wished to admit. because a small part of her feared they might be correct. One rainy afternoon, while grey clouds drifted over London, a carriage bearing the Hawthorne crest arrived unexpectedly outside Ashcombe Manor. A note accompanied it. Lady Eleanor, the weather appears determined to ruin everyone's mood. Permit me to offer an alternative. Eleanor stared at the elegant handwriting. Her pulse quickened. An hour later, she found herself seated beside Sebastian inside the carriage as they traveled through the countryside beyond the city. Rain streaked across the windows. Fields blurred into silver and green. For a long while neither spoke. The silence felt strangely comfortable. Eventually Sebastian glanced toward her. Do you know why I dislike London? The question surprised her. I assumed your grace enjoyed it. Then I have deceived you. She smiled faintly. I find that difficult to believe. Most people mistake tolerance for enjoyment. The carriage rolled onward. Outside, rain tapped gently against the glass. Inside, his expression grew thoughtful. London rewards performance, he said. Every conversation becomes a negotiation. Every smile carries ambition. Every friendship demands something. And you dislike being wanted for your title. I dislike never knowing whether I am wanted for anything else. The honesty startled her. This was not the untouchable Duke society imagined. This was a lonely man speaking without armor. For the first time, Eleanor sensed the weight hidden beneath his effortless confidence. Power had not protected him from isolation. It had merely disguised it. Over the following weeks, their friendship deepened. They visited botanical exhibitions, walked through galleries, discussed literature beside fireplaces glowing with amber light. The more time Eleanor spent with Sebastian, the more she discovered a man entirely different from his public reputation. He possessed patience, humor, unexpected gentleness. Most surprising of all, he seemed happiest during ordinary moments. One evening they wandered through the vast glass greenhouse on one of his estates. Moonlight filtered through towering palms. Exotic flowers perfumed the air. The world beyond the glass seemed to disappear. You still have not answered my question, Eleanor said. What question? Why me? Sebastian slowed. For a moment she worried she had spoken too boldly. Then he stopped beside a flowering orchid. His gaze settled somewhere beyond the present. As strange as it sounds, Lady Eleanor, I first noticed you years ago. Her breath caught. Years? He nodded. I was 23. Newly responsible for my title. Newly exhausted by it. A faint smile touched his lips. I visited your father's estate during a hunting party. Eleanor struggled to remember the occasion. You would not remember me. Try me. It was raining. The words emerged quietly. Most guests were celebrating indoors. I stepped away because I needed silence. His expression softened. That is when I saw you. A strange warmth spread through her chest. You spoke to me? No. The smile remained. You never noticed I was there. They resumed walking slowly beneath the moonlit glass. I found you near the old stable, Sebastian continued. An injured bird had fallen during the storm. Memory flickered. Suddenly she remembered. The tiny creature. Its damaged wing. The hours she had spent caring for it. You sat in the rain protecting something smaller than yourself. His voice carried quiet admiration. Most people would have ignored it. It was suffering. Exactly. The simplicity of her answer made him laugh softly. You looked at that bird the same way most people reserve for family. Neither spoke for several seconds. The memory seemed impossibly distant. Yet somehow he had carried it for years. I never forgot it, he admitted. Emotion tightened her throat. Why? Because kindness is rare. The answer lingered between them. The silence that followed felt different. Warmer. More dangerous. Eleanor suddenly understood that her feelings were changing. Friendship no longer explained the way her heart responded whenever he entered a room. Friendship no longer explained why his happiness mattered so much. The realization frightened her. Because affection invited heartbreak. And because men like Sebastian Hawthorne could have anyone. Days later, that fear began to prove itself justified. An invitation arrived from the Marquis of Thornfield. The Marquis possessed wealth, influence, and political power rivaling many members of Parliament. His daughter, Lady Beatrice, was considered one of the most desirable women in England. Rumors immediately circulated. The Marquis intended to secure a marriage between Beatrice and the Duke. Society celebrated the possibility. The match appeared perfect, practical, advantageous. Everything noble families admired. Everything Eleanor was not. At first Sebastian dismissed the rumors. Then the pressure intensified. Political allies approached him privately. Estate advisors expressed concern. Family acquaintances offered carefully disguised warnings. Each conversation carried the same message. A duke should marry strategically. A duke should strengthen alliances. A duke should not risk his position for sentiment. One evening Eleanor accidentally overheard part of a conversation at a charity gala. The Marquis himself stood speaking with Sebastian near a balcony. "You are making a mistake." The older man's voice remained polite. That somehow made it more threatening. "Am I?" "The Ashcombe girl offers you nothing." Sebastian's expression hardened. "On the contrary." The Marquis stepped closer. "You possess responsibilities larger than personal preferences. And you possess remarkable confidence regarding my responsibilities." A dangerous silence followed. Then came the words Eleanor would remember forever. "If you continue this path," the Marquis said quietly, "certain doors may close permanently." The threat was subtle, refined, impossible to challenge openly, yet unmistakable. For the first time, Eleanor understood the true cost of Sebastian's attention. This was no longer merely gossip. Powerful people were beginning to notice. Powerful people were beginning to object. That night she stood alone beside her bedroom window while moonlight spilled across the floor. Below, London glittered beneath the darkness. Inside her chest, fear slowly replaced hope. She loved him. The truth arrived suddenly, clearly, irrevocably. And because she loved him, another realization followed close behind. If choosing her threatened his future, his influence, and everything he had spent his life protecting, then perhaps the greatest act of love would not be staying. As dawn approached, Eleanor unfolded a sheet of paper and began writing a letter she prayed Sebastian Hawthorne would never have to read. Eleanor Ashcombe disappeared 3 days later. No dramatic farewell marked her departure. No tearful confrontation echoed through the halls of Ashcombe Manor. Before dawn, while the household still slept beneath heavy silence, she stepped into a modest carriage carrying only 2 trunks, several books, and a heart she felt was breaking quietly inside her chest. The letter remained on her writing desk. Sealed, addressed, unsent. She could not bear to leave it behind, nor could she bear to give it to him. Instead, she carried it with her as the carriage rolled away from London. Rain accompanied the journey. Gray clouds stretched endlessly across the sky. Villages passed. Fields vanished behind curtains of mist. With every mile, Eleanor told herself she was doing the right thing. Love should not demand sacrifice from only one person. Yet she had watched powerful men circle Sebastian like vultures around a battlefield. She had heard their warnings, seen their calculations, felt the pressure building around him. If she remained, she would become a weakness others could exploit. If she left, perhaps he would be free. The thought offered little comfort. By evening she arrived at Seabriar House, a forgotten estate overlooking the northern coast. The property had belonged to a distant aunt whose death years earlier left it abandoned. Salt winds battered the stone walls. Wild roses climbed weathered terraces. Beyond the cliffs, the sea stretched toward the horizon like liquid silver. It was beautiful, lonely, perfect. Nobody there cared about titles. Nobody discussed scandals. Nobody measured a woman's worth according to the men pursuing her. For the first time in months, Eleanor existed beyond society's gaze. Yet freedom proved strangely hollow. Morning walks no longer felt complete. Books seemed quieter. Gardens seemed emptier. Every beautiful thing reminded her of someone absent. Meanwhile, London erupted. The disappearance of Lady Eleanor Ashcombe became the season's greatest mystery. Guests discussed nothing else. Theories multiplied daily. Some claimed the Duke had ended the courtship. Others insisted Eleanor had secured a secret engagement abroad. Many concluded she had fled after realizing Sebastian never intended marriage. The cruelest rumors became the most popular. Society always preferred disappointment to hope. Vivian initially believed her sister would return within days. Then weeks passed. Concern gradually replaced irritation. Even Lady Ashcombe stopped discussing marriage prospects. At every gathering, one question lingered. Where had Eleanor gone? Sebastian Hawthorne asked the same question. At first he assumed she required time alone. Then her absence lengthened. Letters received no reply. Invitations remained unanswered. Eventually concern became alarm. One afternoon he arrived at Ashcombe Manor determined to obtain answers. Instead he found confusion. Nobody knew where Eleanor had gone. Nobody understood why. The realization unsettled him more than he wished to admit. That evening he sat alone inside the library of Blackthorn Hall while storm clouds gathered beyond the windows. For years he had mastered every challenge placed before him. Estate disputes, political conflicts, financial crises. None had left him feeling helpless. This did. The silence she left behind seemed larger than entire rooms. Days later, desperation overcame restraint. Sebastian began searching personally. His advisors protested immediately. Dukes did not abandon responsibilities to chase women across the country. Sebastian ignored them. For the first time in years, duty came second. He traveled through villages, visited distant estates, followed rumors that dissolved upon inspection. Weeks became months. Autumn slowly surrendered to winter. The search continued. Then fate intervened unexpectedly. Late one evening, Vivian arrived unannounced at Blackthorn Hall. She carried a small wooden box. I found this hidden among Eleanor's belongings. Sebastian opened the box. Inside rested pressed flowers, old sketches, letters, and one sealed envelope. His name appeared on the front. Neither spoke. Slowly he broke the seal. The words inside altered everything. Eleanor had written about the Marquis, the threats, the pressure, the fear that her presence would damage his future. She confessed her love only once. One sentence. Simple, honest, devastating. Then she explained why she left. Not because she doubted him. Because she believed he deserved more than conflict, more than sacrifice, more than her. When Sebastian finished reading, silence filled the room. Vivian wiped tears from her eyes. I should have seen how unhappy she was. He folded the letter carefully. No. His voice remained calm. You should have seen how extraordinary she was. The following morning he resumed his search. This time he possessed direction. Certain details within the letter narrowed the possibilities. References to cliffs, sea air, wild roses, a forgotten inheritance. The clues guided him northward. For nearly 2 weeks he followed the coastline. Then one stormy afternoon, everything changed. A local fisherman mentioned a young woman living alone at Seabriar House. The description matched perfectly. Hours later, Sebastian stood upon a windswept cliff overlooking a restless sea. The air tasted of salt and rain. Waves crashed against jagged rocks below. And there she was. Eleanor stood near the edge of the world wrapped in a dark cloak. Her hair danced wildly in the wind. For a moment neither moved. Months of separation vanished beneath a single glance. Shock crossed her face. Then relief. Then fear. He walked toward her slowly. Eleanor. The sound of her name carried across the storm. You should not have come. I crossed half of England. His eyes never left hers. I disagree. Emotion trembled beneath her composure. This changes nothing. It changes everything. The sea roared around them. Rain drifted across the cliffs. For the first time since her departure, the truth stood exposed between them. I left for you, she whispered. I know. You could lose influence. I know. People are already trying to control your future. I know. Frustration flashed across her face. Then why are you here? Sebastian stepped closer. Close enough to see tears gathering in her eyes. Close enough to hear his own heartbeat. Because at last there was no reason left to hide. I have spent my entire life, he said quietly, being told what I ought to value. The wind tugged at his coat. The storm darkened the horizon. Yet his voice never wavered. Titles, alliances, approval. Eleanor stared at him. But none of those things matter if they cost me you. Silence followed. Powerful, fragile, terrifying. Then Sebastian reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document bearing his personal seal. Eleanor's eyes widened. What is that? A faint smile appeared. The beginning of a scandal London will never forget. And before she could ask another question, the Duke revealed that he had summoned every major noble family in England to Blackthorn Hall 3 weeks from that day, where he intended to make an announcement capable of changing both their lives forever. 3 weeks later, Blackthorn Hall glittered brighter than any palace in London. Hundreds of carriages lined the sweeping drive beneath a sky painted with fading gold and violet. Crystal lanterns illuminated the vast estate. Music drifted from open windows. Footmen moved through the evening like clockwork while noble families arrived dressed in jewels, velvet, and expectation. Nobody knew why Duke Sebastian Hawthorne had summoned them. That mystery alone guaranteed attendance. Inside the grand ballroom, conversations flowed beneath chandeliers that blazed like captured stars. Marble columns rose toward a painted ceiling where angels watched from clouds. Every influential family in England seemed present. The Marquis of Thornfield arrived with his daughter. Cabinet ministers attended. Earls, viscounts, dukes. Even several members of the royal court accepted invitations. Everyone anticipated an announcement. Most assumed they already knew what it would be. The Duke has finally come to his senses. He will announce Lady Beatrice. The matter has become obvious. Such whispers circulated through the crowd. The Marquis himself appeared especially pleased. Months of pressure had convinced him victory was inevitable. Meanwhile, Eleanor sat alone inside a private drawing room on the upper floor of the mansion. A silver-haired maid adjusted the final ribbon on her gown. The dress itself was beautiful in its simplicity. Soft ivory silk. No excessive jewels. No elaborate embellishments. Everything about it reflected the woman wearing it. Elegant. Quiet. Unpretentious. Eleanor studied her reflection. The shy woman who once hid behind ballroom columns still stared back at her. Yet something had changed. She no longer looked invisible. Months of pain had carved strength into her spirit. Months of love had taught her that gentleness was not weakness. A soft knock sounded. The door opened. Vivian entered. For several moments neither sister spoke. Their relationship had altered since Eleanor's departure. Old resentments had faded beneath honesty. Vivian crossed the room slowly. "You look beautiful." Eleanor smiled. "So do you." Tears immediately appeared in Vivian's eyes. "I spent years believing people admired me because I deserved it." Her voice trembled. "Then you disappeared." Eleanor listened quietly. "And suddenly I realized how much brighter every room became when you were inside it." The confession carried genuine remorse. "I should have defended you. You were young. I was selfish." Eleanor stepped forward and embraced her. The sisters remained that way for several seconds. Years of misunderstanding dissolved inside a single moment of forgiveness. When they finally separated, Vivian laughed softly through her tears. "Do you know what terrifies half of London tonight?" "What?" "The possibility that a duke may actually marry for love." For the first time that evening, Eleanor laughed. Then the doors below opened. The gathering began. Guests filled the ballroom. Music faded. Conversations quieted. Expectation thickened the air. At precisely 8 o'clock, Sebastian Hawthorne entered. Silence spread instantly. The Duke wore formal black evening attire. Confident. Composed. Yet those who knew him well noticed something unusual. Relief. As though he had spent years carrying a burden he was finally ready to set down. He walked to the center of the ballroom. Every eye followed. "My friends," he began. His voice carried easily through the enormous chamber. "I appreciate your attendance this evening." The crowd listened attentively. "I am aware many of you expect an engagement announcement." Several guests smiled knowingly. The Marquis appeared particularly satisfied. Sebastian noticed. Then continued. "Fortunately, your expectations will not be entirely disappointed." A ripple of amusement moved through the room. The Duke paused. Then his expression grew serious. "Before I proceed, however, I wish to discuss something else." Curiosity replaced confidence. No one interrupted. "For most of my life, I believed success required obedience." The statement surprised many. "I obeyed tradition." His gaze swept across the room. "I obeyed expectation." His voice remained calm. "I obeyed people who confused power with wisdom." Unease gradually spread through several influential guests. The Marquis's smile disappeared. Sebastian continued anyway. "I was told which schools to attend, which friendships to cultivate, which opinions to hold." The silence deepened. "And eventually I was told which woman I should marry." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The Duke's eyes settled briefly upon the Marquis. The message required no explanation. A faint flush appeared on the older man's face. "Fortunately," Sebastian said, "I discovered something remarkable." The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. "A title grants authority." His voice softened. "But love grants clarity." The words echoed through the chamber. Then he turned toward the grand staircase. Every guest instinctively followed his gaze. At the top stood Eleanor. The sight stole the room's breath. Moonlight from the towering windows touched her ivory gown. Her expression reflected equal measures of courage and vulnerability. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Sebastian began walking toward her. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Simply with absolute certainty. The crowd parted. Noble families stepped aside. Powerful men who spent lifetimes commanding others silently cleared his path. When he reached the staircase, he offered his hand. Eleanor accepted. Together they descended. The ballroom watched. No one whispered now. No one laughed. The woman once ignored by society commanded the attention of every person present. They returned to the center of the room. Sebastian turned toward the assembled aristocracy, then toward Eleanor. For a brief moment, the entire world seemed to disappear. There were only two people left inside the vast ballroom. The Duke slowly lowered himself onto one knee. Gasps exploded throughout the crowd. Several women covered their mouths. A crystal glass shattered somewhere in the distance. Even those expecting an engagement had not anticipated this. Dukes did not kneel publicly, especially not before hundreds of witnesses. Yet Sebastian remained exactly where he was. One knee upon polished marble. One hand holding Eleanor's. His gaze never leaving hers. Emotion shimmered behind his composed expression. "When I first saw you," he said softly, "you were protecting an injured bird in the rain." Tears gathered in Eleanor's eyes. "You had no audience." His voice deepened. "No reward. No reason to be kind except that kindness existed naturally within you." The ballroom listened in complete silence. "I have met queens. I have negotiated with ministers. I have dined with princes." His fingers tightened gently around hers. "Yet none of them taught me more about courage than the woman standing before me." Eleanor's composure finally cracked. A tear slipped down her cheek. Sebastian smiled. "You remained gentle when the world encouraged bitterness. You remained honest when deception would have been easier. You remained yourself when everyone demanded something different." His next words carried throughout the ballroom. "I do not admire you despite your quiet nature." He rose slowly to his feet. "I admire you because of it." Several guests lowered their eyes. Some looked ashamed. They remembered every cruel joke, every dismissal, every insult. Sebastian reached into his coat and produced a velvet box. Then he opened it. The diamond inside caught the chandelier light and scattered stars across the room. But nobody was looking at the ring. They were watching Eleanor. Watching a woman discover her own worth. "Lady Eleanor Ashcombe." The Duke's voice softened. "Will you do me the greatest honor of my life and become my Duchess?" Tears flowed freely now. Yet Eleanor was smiling. Not because a Duke had chosen her. Because she finally understood she had never needed choosing to possess value. The realization transformed her. She looked directly into Sebastian's eyes. Then she gave the answer that changed everything. "Yes." The ballroom erupted. Applause thundered against the walls. Guests rose to their feet. Even those who opposed the match found themselves swept into the moment. Vivian cried openly. Her father wept without embarrassment. The Marquis stood frozen as years of influence collapsed before a single word. Yet none of it mattered. Because while the celebration roared around them, Sebastian leaned closer and whispered something only Eleanor could hear. "I was never rescuing you." She blinked. "What?" His smile carried warmth, gratitude, and love. "You were rescuing me." And as the orchestra began to play, the forgotten sister nobody wanted stepped onto the ballroom floor as the future Duchess of Blackthorn, while the man who possessed everything finally found the one treasure money, power, and titles could never buy.